The footage had been sitting inside the courthouse system like thousands of other recordings, looping endlessly, never meant for public eyes, a quiet archive of daily authority that no one bothered to review unless something went wrong. But this time, something did go wrong. Or rather, something finally escaped. And once it did, there was no pulling it back. Because the clip showed exactly what people had always suspected, but rarely proved. Power behaving freely when it believed it was invisible. There was no sound to soften it, no official explanation to reshape it, only raw movement that spoke louder than words ever could. The judge leaning back in his chair and flicking his hand as if the woman standing before him were nothing more than a minor delay in his schedule. The officer stepping forward with the practiced confidence of someone who had done this many times before, fingers tightening around her arm, not violently but firmly enough to make resistance pointless. And the woman herself walking away without shouting, without collapsing, without begging, her posture straight, her face calm. A dignity that somehow made the moment even more uncomfortable to watch. The video first appeared in obscure corners of the internet, small local pages that usually shared community news and lost pet photos, but viewers immediately sensed it was something different, something real, and they shared it again, and with each repost the audience grew larger. The clip moving from neighborhood feeds to regional pages, from regional pages to national platforms, where strangers who had never stepped inside that courthouse suddenly found themselves watching a scene that felt strangely personal. People slowed the footage down, zoomed in on the judge's dismissive gesture, replayed the moment the officer reached for her arm, paused on the woman's face as she turned toward the exit, analyzing every second like detectives examining evidence, and by the time the sun set, the clip had been viewed millions of times, transforming what had been a routine act of courtroom control into a public display of institutional behavior. Yet what made the video powerful was not just what it showed, but what it reminded people of. Because instead of shock, there was recognition, a heavy sense of familiarity that spread through the comments, as if viewers were saying to themselves, "I have seen this. I have felt this. I have been that person standing there trying to speak while someone with authority decided I didn't matter." The footage awakened memories of rushed hearings, of judges cutting people off mid-sentence, of officers standing too close, of citizens walking out of buildings, feeling smaller than when they entered. And suddenly the clip was no longer about one woman or one courtroom, but about a shared experience that crossed cities, states, and generations. It exposed a truth that had lived quietly in people's minds for years, that behind the formal language of law and the polished surfaces of government buildings, power often operated in simple human ways, through gestures, tone, impatience, and the assumption that no one important was watching. The courthouse camera had not recorded a scandal in the dramatic sense. No shouting, no chaos, no violence, but it had captured something far more revealing, the normal rhythm of how authority treated those it considered unimportant, and that normality was what unsettled people most. The clip didn't feel like a rare mistake. It felt like a routine moment that had finally been seen, and once it was seen, it could not be unseen. As the video continued spreading across the internet, something even more powerful followed it. The voices of people who had lived through the same kind of moment and finally felt brave enough to speak. At first, the comments were short, just a few words saying "this happened to me too," but within hours, those words turned into full stories. Former defendants explaining how they had stood in front of judges who barely looked up, how their explanations were cut off before they finished a sentence, how fines were issued like receipts instead of judgments. Public defenders joined in, admitting that what the video showed was not unusual at all, that they had watched clients rushed through hearings for years, especially those who came without lawyers or money, treated not as individuals but as cases to be cleared as quickly as possible. Elderly men posted photos of faded paperwork, complaints they had filed long ago about unfair treatment that were never answered. some even stamped as received by the courthouse but somehow lost afterward, while mothers described how a single traffic fine had snowballed into debt, missed work, and constant stress because no one in the courtroom had cared to listen. As more people shared, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Different ages, races, and neighborhoods all telling nearly identical stories, like they had all read from the same script written by the system itself. Then the evidence started surfacing, pieces that were never meant to leave internal files. Audio recordings that had escaped deletion capturing judges laughing at defendants, cutting them off, delivering verdicts in seconds. Emails showing staff quietly moving complaints into folders labeled resolved or archived without any investigation, and instructions passed down about keeping the docket moving fast, no matter what. What officials had always described as efficiency was suddenly exposed for what it truly was: a structure designed to control people, minimize resistance, and maximize revenue, where fairness slowed the process and listening cost time. The public began to see that the video was not an accident, but a glimpse into how the courtroom normally functioned. A machine built to process citizens quickly rather than serve them justly, and the more proof that emerged, the clearer it became that this was not the failure of one person, but the behavior of an entire system that had learned how to operate without accountability. When the formal hearing was finally called, the room was filled with people who had come expecting another ordinary testimony, another story of someone mistreated by a system too large to change. But the atmosphere shifted the moment the woman from the video walked forward with the same calm she had shown in the footage. She spoke clearly, without anger or hesitation, and then revealed that she was not simply a citizen challenging unfair treatment, but a federal justice who had spent her life interpreting the law at the highest level. A wave of silence swept through the chamber, not because of the title itself, but because of the meaning behind it. The realization that if someone with that level of authority could be dismissed so casually, then every person without power who had stood in that courtroom before her had been judged long before they ever opened their mouths. From that point on, the evidence carried a different weight, as statistical reports were presented showing that poorer defendants and minorities consistently received harsher penalties and shorter hearings, while audio recordings replayed the same cold tones and rushed decisions heard in the leaked clip, proving the behavior was repeated, not accidental. Witnesses came forward one after another, each describing nearly identical experiences of being silenced, laughed at, or removed when they tried to defend themselves, their stories lining up so perfectly that denial became impossible. The courtroom that once controlled the narrative could no longer hide behind procedure or tradition, because the truth now existed in numbers, in recordings, and in human testimony that painted a clear picture of systematic injustice. By the end of the session, it was no longer a question of whether something wrong had happened, but how long it had been allowed to happen without anyone stepping in. And for the first time, the institution that had judged thousands of lives was forced to confront the damage it had quietly caused.